If you've been watching some of what I do, you might be curious to know some more of the specifics of what goes into bringing to life different 3D environments. I gloss over it a lot, but there's a lot that goes into 3D modeling. I try to mainly focus on talking about the creative challenges, but it is also a technical challenge with a series of steps that take different approaches. In this video, I'm going to tackle the process behind 3D modeling low-poly stylized terrain, whether you're making video games or anything else. This will cover the creation and philosophies behind making the textures, modeling the geometry itself for the terrain, and how the textures can be mapped to the geometry. I hope I can offer some understanding and appreciation for how I go about 3D modeling worlds, and hopefully, this can empower you to pursue your own projects. Now, I get a lot of messages from people who are curious about how I use 3D software. Mr. Duck12345678 asks, "Sorry if you've been asked this before, but what programs do you use for 3D modeling?" So I use a free piece of 3D software called Blender. It's an all-in-one stop for 3D modeling, animation, rendering, and anything in between. Low-Poly64 told me, "I'm in the process of learning Blender modeling, so this was awesome to watch." Thanks. I hope this video is even more helpful. I know in my usual time lapses it can seem like I'm glossing over a lot, so I hope it's helpful to slow things down and break down each step of the process. And Dr. The Rich says, 15 plus years of Blender experience, and landscape modeling is still the thing I dislike doing most in Blender. Maybe that can change after this video. We'll see. For all of you or anyone who might be interested in learning how to break into 3D software yourselves, while there are plenty of YouTube videos or other online tutorials to help you get started, another resource available to you is Southern New Hampshire University, who is sponsoring today's video. In SNHU's Game Department program, you'll learn scripting for games, interactive animation, digital game development, and digital graphic design for the web. What's nice about SNHU is that they are accredited, nonprofit, and online. They're super affordable, and their online tuition rates are some of the lowest in the nation. Your courses are taught by faculty with real-world experience, so you'll have opportunities to actually connect with people in the industry. When you graduate, SNHU will still be there to help you as you begin your job hunt, too. There are always games looking for level and environmental designers at the indie and the AAA level, too. Plus, the skills that come with being a 3D generalist, someone with a proficiency in many general areas of 3D design, can help open up doors in the filmmaking space, with many post-production houses hiring 3D generalists with a 3D modeling portfolio. This can help open up doors in VFX or title design, too. You might be eligible for financial aid or have previous college credits that could help fast-track your degree at SNHU. Go to snhu.edu/windwaker and learn how you can get started with a game development degree. But for now, it's my turn to school you, so let's get into it. Let's begin to work on our own little environment as an example. It won't be huge, but it'll be enough to show you what goes into the creation process. Let's start by working on some textures. I know for what I usually do on this channel, I'm not making my own textures, but I want to make my own this time for the sake of showing what goes into making good ones. So first off, you want to think about the overall composition of the image. What's the point of the texture? What other textures will it be interacting with? That's one of the most important questions. A rock wall isn't just a rock wall, but it might be connected to a patch of grass above or below it or both. So making sure your textures are able to transition naturally from one material to adjacent ones, it's a great rule to try to stick to whenever you can. Also, you want to make sure your texture can be seamless so that when it repeats in a certain direction, it tiles well. There's a couple of things to consider there. You don't want the details in your texture to be so specific that it looks artificial when the texture repeats. Lean into natural patterns and make sure that the colors of each edge match. But not every texture needs to repeat in all directions. For example, I want my grass texture to be completely seamless, but my rock walls only need to be seamless horizontally, since I want the vertical edges to be able to transition to grass. Alright, so now we have some textures, so where do you start when you start modeling? I typically have a pretty specific order of operations, but find your own process that works for you. My process is also different because for most of what I do on this channel, I'm not working from a super strict concept art or a detailed blueprint. My modeling process is where I let myself make creative decisions, and that may not be true for everyone. Every project has its own needs, so be aware of that while you watch. But for me, I start with what I'm most confident with whatever key feature of the environment should take priority. For here, that might be the path itself. So we want to be able to go from walking alongside a river to traveling up a mountainside. The general shape of the walking path can dictate the placement of the rest of those features. And then with the path done, I can sculpt out the river, following it in accordance with the shapes I've already set. For the river, because the water level will be flat, I only need a single plane for it unless there's a change in the river direction. So wherever I can, I try to save polygons. No unnecessary bevels, no pride about things looking blocky or not. Just embrace it as a part of the aesthetic. The textures do a lot of work, even simple ones. What's important is the feeling that someone gets when seeing your model. It doesn't have to be high fidelity or detailed or smooth, it just has to capture the right feeling. Obviously, the leeway you have as a designer depends on your project and its technical needs, but my hope is that while you may not be able to escape unnecessary restrictions placed on you by the job, you can at least avoid your own personal restrictions that you unnecessarily place on yourself. Look at how, too, after we have the river and the path, it's not hard to extrapolate where the grass should be, filling in the gaps. And then once the ground or floor of the model is complete to your liking, it's not hard to fill in where the mountainsides or walls should be. There's a certain point where, to me, it almost feels like the model's making itself. Okay, so now that we have a solid basis for the geometry, let's unpack how to go about wrapping textures onto our mesh. Normally, I do this process while I model the geometry, but I saved it for the end for the sake of demonstrating the process on its own with a little more focus. Like we talked about during the texture creation stage, different textures are made to be wrapped in different ways. Our grass is seamless, so it's very forgiving. I just select all the verts that surround the parts of the mesh that are meant to be grass, and use Q projection typically, or the default unwrap option, and scale the texture until I'm happy with how things look. Path sides are pretty straightforward too, but require a little more attention. It's pretty much as simple as just unwrapping the texture so that the edges of the mesh line up with the borders of the texture. But it takes just a little bit more attentiveness to straighten up the UVs if your mesh was especially windy. Maybe there's a better way to deal with that than what I figured out yet. Cliff sides are pretty much the same way. You just have to be attentive to how you decide to stretch your texture, especially for one that repeats a lot. You just have to use your own subjectivity, but be aware of trying to make things not feel too repetitive. With all of that in mind, those are the basics to UV wrapping, so you can take those ideas and do anything. Mapping the texture of the water works pretty much the same way as the grass, and the beachfront works the same way as the paths. It's all pretty simple. You just have to know your textures and how they all fit together. And that's about it. Let's take a look at what we've created. Looks pretty solid. And while it's basic, all of these philosophies can help jumpstart your work on more complex worlds. And the basic theory that goes into 3D modeling is the same here as it is across different art styles and different poly counts too. Let me know if you have any questions. I know this breakdown was pretty simple, but that was my goal. If what I do is daunting at all, I want to make it feel simple and approachable for anyone interested in doing something similar. And once again, a huge thank you to SNHU for making this video possible. Go to snhu.edu/windwaker to learn more about what they can do for you. But that's all the time I have, so without further ado, I'll let you go.